Welcome to Restaurant Deal Making Exposed, the only show that equips you with everything you need to know about restaurant transactions. In this show, we tell you all about how to make the sale or purchase of your restaurant not just possible, but successful. Now here are your hosts, ex-restaurateurs and seasoned brokers, Patrick Toda and Andy Mirabel.
All right, everyone, welcome back to Restaurant Deal Making Exposed. This is Andy. I'm with Patrick, and we have a wonderful guest today. This is our episode 10. We're calling it A Lending Hand. Our wonderful guest is Bob Porter. Let me tell you a little background on Bob. Robert Porter, he's a senior vice president in business development and SBA lending for Plumas Bank. Bob has been in the game since 1989 and lends in multiple Western states. He specializes in SBA 7A loans for the purchase or startup of a business, as well as SBA 7A and SBA 504 loans for the purchase of real estate or for small business, investor loans, or for the refinance or purchase of commercial real estate and conventional loans. Bob is vastly experienced within the lending world. Many of our listeners may already know that getting a bank or SBA funding for a restaurant project is not easy to obtain, given the high failure rate of restaurants. Bob has pre-approved and funded more deals with Restaurant Realty Company, the brokerage that Patrick and I work with, than any other lender. Bob has funded almost 50 loans with Restaurant Realty Company, and I thankfully finally got to work with Bob last year, getting Fandy's restaurant in Sebastopol funded for my buyers. Bob generally does 30 to 35 loans per year, ranging from $14 million to $22 million total in lending. Most of his loans are SBA 7A loans with the occasional 504. Our listeners should be very excited to know that over the past 10 years, he's finances roughly 10 to 14 restaurants, bars, caterers, cafes, bakeries, or food-related businesses annually. That is very high for one lender and one man. He has a lot of returning customers with franchise stores that buy or build additional locations, including concepts such as Papa Murphy's, Round Table, Little Caesars, and so on. His returning customers make up half of each year's hospitality deals, which speaks volumes about him and what he does. Bob's vast experience as a lender and entrepreneur gives him a more innate ability to know what type of business is fundable and is likely to succeed over the next lender. Bob has been in the loan applicant's shoes, as he too obtained an SBA loan for his startup business, Granite Arch Climbing Center, a large indoor rock climbing center in the Sacramento area. So, Bob, that's very long-winded, but it's a pleasure having you here. Your resume is very long. We all really respect you in our brokerage, and I'm sure all the other folks you work with. But in addition, so our lenders should know, in addition to just being a really, apt lender in what he does, he's also a very interesting and fun person. So all the stories you've shared with us about your extreme sports and hobbies and everything else have always been really entertaining. So anyways, this is Robert Porter. We call him Bob Porter. He's the adventure junkie and lender. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being on your podcast today.
Hey, Bob. Good to talk to you finally here. I've actually had the experience of working with Bob on a couple deals, and he's always been very professional, transparent, and seamless with the experience. He's also taught me a lot about SBA. I mean, I was early in the game here, would call Bob and trying to get businesses pre-approved. And so he's taught me a lot over the years. And I really appreciate the fact that he was so generous with his time.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely, when we worked together last year, obviously we've talked in previous years at, cab conferences, just over, different listings I get. Are they pre-approvable businesses or not? But working with you and your team last year, Bob, was a total eye-opening, wonderful experience. Also just really takes you down through all the steps it takes to get to the finish line of getting an SBA loan. So that was a great experience for me too. So I think one of the main points we really want to pound in today is that obtaining a pre-approval letter for our sellers and clients, it's massive. So can you, Bob, chime in and let us know a little bit about what it takes to get a pre-approval letter, what you're looking for, so our clients can know how best to set themselves up to do this with their businesses?
Absolutely. Ideally, what you guys are providing me and you have in the past is your CBR, your confidential business review that really tells me about the deal. What are we financing here? How do you have it priced? You guys put together some nice spreads that recast the earnings for seller discretionary earnings. But at the same time, I also ask for, in addition to your workup and your spreads and your valuation model and the information on the business, is give me the seller's actual tax returns. Let's put a second set of eyes on these. I've been doing this for 35 years, and I want to spread the deal as we would as lenders. We don't give credence to every add back that a seller has. A seller traveling and expensing that, is not always a good thing. It is for tax purposes. It isn't for cash flow and sellability and valuation purposes. So I want to spread the tax returns. I'm asking currently right now for the last three, 21, 2, 3, and then an interim 6-month statement, as well a comparative interim statement for last year, 23, to see, is the business still trending well or is it fallen off? With inflation, with some other things going on right now, the economy changing, I've seen quite a big dip in the last year in restaurant businesses. And, nobody wants to catch a falling knife. So we're trying to see, is that business sustainable? Do you have it price priced commensurate with today versus commensurate with its best year in the last 3?
Do you see a lot of brokers or agents inflating list prices or not really, putting forth a realistic list price for the businesses that they bring to you?
Unfortunately, most do. Unfortunately, they're trying to fetch 3 to 5 multiples of SDE and a lot of creative ad backs. I'll go in and hammer the ad backs and say, this is no lender in the nation. There's 5,000 SBA lenders in the nation, and no lender in the nation is going to give credence to the ad back, for instance, of health insurance for a seller. Why? Because we want our borrowers to have health insurance. Well, health insurance might be 20, 30, 40,000 a year that a buyer is going to need to replace that seller. It's prudent to have health insurance. In many instances, it's required by law. That extends to a value of, it could be $60,000, $70,000 in valuation in and of itself. It doesn't add to value in our world. It might in the real world. It doesn't in a lending world. And so I see a lot of overvaluations right now. I love how you guys value businesses kind of in that 2.4 to 3.2 range, depending on the deal, depending on the size. Bigger a business is, the higher of a multiple it'll fetch, and vice versa.
Bob, do you find that, I know that one of the things I learned from you was, to get pre-approved, it has to cover the debt service, which is really important, obviously. And then there's the living wage. Does the living wage always have to come into play? Like if they have a spouse who makes really great money, how important is it to have that living wage in there?
We put in a replacement wage buyer specific. So if somebody, for instance, lives in the Bay Area, they need a heck of a lot more than $30,000 a year to live on to exist. You can't rent anything for that, let alone a mortgage payment and having a car and some credit cards and some general living expense. But we do factor in a living wage for a couple of reasons. One, it's got to support a family in some capacity, even if a spouse works, even if they have rental properties, etc. Not so much specific to that buyer, but rather, what if you buy a business and decide, I hate this, I don't want this. 6 months later, I got to sell it. Well, if it only cash flows at 0 for a replacement buyer plus debt service, then what does it cash flow for the next buyer? It doesn't. So it's overpriced commensurate with its cash flow is what it boils down to.
How much of the pre-approval is based on like the last rolling 12 months versus like, especially right now coming out of the pandemic, like how important is 2021 when you're looking at businesses?
It's not terribly important. We're really mostly looking at the trend, right? Is when did COVID affect it? I've seen COVID affect things only in 20 and rebound. It largely depended on your county. I live and work in Placer County. We're a very conservative county that came out of COVID way faster than the Bay Area and LA ever thought of coming out of it. I mean, we came out, there were bars in my town that never shut down for a day. They had a back door, like a speakeasy, for example. So, but we weight those years respective, and we weight them differently for every deal, depending on what the trend looks like. If a business fell off a cliff in 23 and 24, the weighting of those years or those periods is significantly greater than if it's trending upwards.
Yeah. I think it's a really valid point about location specific or county specific. I mean, it's valid. You live in Placer County. I mean, Roseville just is gangbusters on these restaurants and bars out there and so on. But when I'm, looking at places and giving an opinion of value in Oakland, in San Francisco,
It's the opposite.
It's really, I'm seeing two different tales to the tape.
So like in your county out there, did they come back down to a normalized revenue in SDE? Because I assume that people were traveling out that way because they were open. And so they probably got a huge increase. And then now have they come down a little bit, or did that not happen?
They absolutely have come down. We've seen, I'll kind of use the range of 8 to 16% reduction in revenue from their peak. And it wasn't just, well, it was a peak for a lot of different reasons. One, people were traveling and coming to, more conservative counties, but also people had a lot of stimulus. People were rich in those stimulus years and they had pent up desire to go out. They were tired of cooking their own cooking.
I know when I saw the trends start to trend down a little bit on revenue, when did you see it, Bob? Are we talking in sometime in 2023 into 2024, you saw a downturn?
Yeah, mid 23 through now. And I'm still seeing it.
Yeah.
So if we go back to the ad backs, what personal expenses will you consider, or will you not consider any of them?
I will just broad brush it that we in general don't consider any personal expense add backs as per tax return and P&L. What I would suggest is that as the moment you guys talk to a seller is that you coach them on, hey, cut it out. Take your tax benefits later. Take them after the fact. Take them in a different way later, but don't throw all this in there. I see sellers of not so much restaurants, but other blue collar work fixing up their four-wheel drives and sponsoring race teams, including their children that race, motorcycles and side-by-sides, and they're expensing it all. And it's hard to distinguish, is that sponsorship advertising? Because what we like in most of those expenses too is advertising. I take you guys out to lunch from time to time. I buy you drinks from time to time. That's advertising. Well, that's meals and entertainment. Well, that's a discretionary ad back, isn't it? No, it's not, depending on the business. Is it comps to customers? That's advertising, etc. So broad brush, very few discretionary expenses or ad backs. I would ask sellers to curtail them.
Does that change from lender to lender? Do different lenders, some be more accepting of certain ad backs?
So I've worked for 5 banks in 35 years, the last 15 with Plumas Bank. No underwriter has treated anything different in my career. And I'm friends with 25, 30 of my competitors, and we all have the same conversation. An underwriter is an underwriter. They all treat it the same way. We are erring on the side of caution to add a little bit of icing to the cake and cherry on top, that there's some fluff in the deal, because we don't want a bad loan. We know that a buyer's learning curve is generally steep and that they are going to make some errors when they take over that business. And errors cost money. And if we leave a little bit of extra on the table, those discretionaries, and don't add them back, then we're not lending to the max that, would you call that conservative? No, I would call it prudent. You guys can call it conservative because you want me to lend more aggressively, and I respect that. But we call it prudent, and we don't want to make bad loans.
That makes perfect sense. It really does. Patrick, how do you process that when we're doing all of our crunching of ad backs in SDE, seller discretionary earning ad backs? How do you look at it? I try to be pretty conservative. I think some of the stuff's BS that we see on the books.
I understand both sides, I guess, from a business perspective and then also from a lending perspective. But, when you get that unicorn business, when you can just do the, EBITDA ad backs and it's extremely profitable, these are the more sellable businesses for many different reasons, because you can get that pre-approval on the SBA, but also for going to a buyer, you're like, look at these tax returns. They're nice and clean, right? That's a very sellable business. And those are the ones that you really want. At the end of the day.
Let me ask you, Bob, if an owner on his tax return shows this is an owner operator, they're there full time as a GM or a chef or whatnot, but they're paying themselves $150,000 in owner compensation. That's not a living wage. So can I do a partial add back for a new owner on that to say, cut it in half?
We add it all back, 100%. Our clean add backs are net income plus owner's comp plus amortization, depreciation, if any, amortization, if any, and interest expense, net income, right? Those 5 items is kind of the basis. There are some one-offs, and the one-offs I generally see are some adjustments to maybe rent. Maybe it's gone up substantially, or the opposite. They've negotiated a lesser rent for a long duration. Legal expenses, if somebody gets sued and all of a sudden they have a $70,000 legal expense, that's a valid one-time add back. Absolutely.
What about a one-time repair? So their mainline sewer went out and they spent $30,000 digging deep and putting in a new pipe that's going to last another 4 or 5 decades from here?
So most accountants won't write that off in 1 year. They'll capitalize it and depreciate it in the same year. So it's the means to the same end, okay? It depends on what the prior years or the other periods look like. If repairs and maintenance is 0, 0, 30, 0, it's a valid add back, and I'll ask you guys to support it by asking for the information from the seller. But if repairs and maintenance are 15 or 20,000 in each year, and then 1 year it spikes to 30, we're not going to know that's a one-time event, because there are normal repairs and maintenance expenses.
That's nice to see a parallel between what Bob just said about how you put these things on the book, how an accountant would book it, and what Don said. Same thing. You shouldn't be putting these large one-time expenses on a P&L. They should be on your balance sheet and amortized over time.
Bob, let me ask you, how much help do you need from the seller during the process of, obtaining a loan for the buyer? I mean, the seller really has to be a part of that transaction and be extremely helpful. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, in general, you guys do a good job of gathering what you need from the seller, but we always like to have access to them in case my underwriter has questions of the seller. Why did revenue change here? Why is cost of goods out of whack? Why is labor out of whack? As of late, we've seen a lot of ERTC credits or ERC credits, and they're buried in 5 different ways in a tax return for 2123. And we're trying to decipher that.
Those are negative add backs. Those aren't applicable to a new buyer. So we got to back that out that would negatively affect the bottom line, correct?
We have to adjust them for that to normalize wages. If you had $1 million in wages, but your accountant only expensed $700,000, well, presumably you got a $300,000 ERC credit. But there are fees on those credits, and the fees on those credits are not always recognized. That is a valid add back. So we got to do a negative adjustment for the credit because wages are artificially low, profits artificially high, but we have to do a valid add back for the cost of getting that ERT, because a lot of those companies were charging 10 to 30% for those chasing that money. We want to make sure we recognize that.
I think it's good to point that out. I mean, they're booked in so many different ways, so they're rather hidden for us as agents trying to find these things often, and for you too.
That's actually a really important thing. I mean, is there a way to have the ERTC credit not affect the revenue or profitability? Like, is there a way to put it in the tax return where it's not adjusting or making it look inflated?
It's going to somehow show. So there are times where it's shown as other income. That's erroneous. That's wrong. There are sometimes it's shown as a reduction in wages. That's correct. But there's a supporting schedule in the tax return, if the accountant does it right, that identifies it. So we go back to my example, $1 million, 700 in the last 3 years. Well, there's an anomaly there. What is it? Well, there's 300 missing. Well, I should be able to find a schedule. And so that's where the seller's accountant can help, is to find, hey, identify this. What was the effect? What's the true normalization? Because you guys don't want to sell a business to a buyer that's artificially inflated 1 year. They take over, and an hour later they fail because 300,000 vanished. Nor do we want to finance that.
Back up a little bit here. I know what Patrick and I look for, and you've kind of we request from our sellers to put together an opinion of value. Then we come to you and say, this is what our opinion of value is for this business. Here's the items we have on file. And you, Bob, outlined some of the items that you're looking for from these folks in order to get to a pre-approval situation or letter. Patrick, why, again, what's the importance of a pre-approval letter when it comes to our listings? I think we should point that out for our potential clients and current clients. Why are they so important?
Yeah, I mean, like what I tell my clients, the seller, a lot is we want to get this pre-approval letter because, first of all, it's going to increase the buyer pool. I mean, having to come in with, as little as 15%, obviously, is now all of a sudden that business becomes, available to so many more people than if, they had to come out of pocket on $1 million or something like this, right? Also, I would assume, and I think that when you have an SBA pre-approval for a buyer, they must, have a pretty positive feeling about that if the SBA is willing to lend on this, then obviously this must be a really good business. So it's got to give it a really good look as well.
Absolutely. It's a stamp. It's a stamp on this listing that says that these books, for the most part, seem clean to us thus far.
I would feel more confident about it if I was buying that business. Oh, the
Yeah.
SBA is willing to, approve this, then, maybe this is the right business for me.
Yeah. So if we have that stamp on our listings, it's got a pre-approval letter attached. We have more buyers coming to look at this listing and so on. Bob, what happens next when we get a buyer that makes an offer and we have buyer seller agree, and then we come back to you, say, hey, we have a buyer in hand. What should we be bringing you about this buyer in order to take next steps to get a loan funded?
In theory, you've brought me everything I need from the selling side. That's what allowed me to pre-qualify it. Generally, what I'm missing is an updated financial because I might have done it 3, 4, 6 months ago. Okay. From a buyer standpoint, an introduction, I'd love to have a preliminary conversation to see if they're real. Having done this for 35 years, I know if a buyer is real or not. I can tell on a conversation in 5 minutes if a buyer has money, has experience, has collateral, and if their credit's good. My credit test is this. How's your credit? Oh, it's okay. That's bad.
That's a good litmus test. That's a really good litmus test.
If they say it's excellent, then I don't worry because they know they're an 800, 750.
Yeah.
But if they say it's okay, run.
When they start with a little pause there, it's very telling.
At that point, after a preliminary conversation to say, can I help this person? Do they fit this mold? Do they live in a relative area of this place? If they live in Northern California buying something in SoCal, we're not very comfortable with that.
Well, because why is that?
Because they're not proximate to the business. The commute is, 3 to 10 hours, and it's just not in their backyard. We don't lend in nationally because we don't know anything about Texas and Florida and New York. We lend in 7 Western states because we have a relative footprint and we know what this all looks like. But we don't know the Midwest from Adam, Chicago, etc. It's the same with an owner, a buyer. Do you know that market? Do you know the competition? Do you know the demographics? It's the simple things that I've written a few business plans, and one of them that I wrote was for a drive-through coffee shops. Back in the day when gas stations were contaminated, they would fence the yard in for many years while they cleaned it. Well, that was silly. And what I proposed was drive-through coffee shops like the Starbucks corner locations, like the Dutch Bros. And I said, I can use these sites. I can create a business here. But I didn't know how many people bought coffees. I didn't know if they were men or women. I didn't know if they were to go or sit there. I didn't know if they bought a muffin or they bought a basic coffee or a fancy coffee. What did I do? I sat in coffee shops for days on end, counting coffees, counting muffins, identifying gender, etc., to try to understand the industry better to see if it worked. If you don't know your demographics of the restaurant that you're buying, you don't know the small little cute town of Truckee, California, or Nevada City, or Mendocino, versus San Francisco because you live in LA or vice versa.
Really what you're looking for, we want owner operators. We want their boots on the ground in there so they actually can live and breathe the business and be present. So knowing the community and the, demographic is vital.
Yeah, I think another big important part on continuing this conversation is, we come across a lot of people who have, the great financials, great credit, they're very lendable, but they're not restaurant people. They don't have any restaurant experience. And I try to express to them how important that is. And I think they underestimate that. Bob, can you talk about how important restaurant experience is, even if the person's wealthy and has all the money in the world?
Absolutely. In general, I'll just tell you, we're not going to finance that buyer. So somebody who's, a tech person out of the Googles of the world and the Amazons who make $500,000 a year, and all of a sudden they want to buy a restaurant for whatever reason, side ancillary income, we have not had success in those at all, period. And it's not something we're going to finance. Now, I will tell you, after 2 years of them owning it, we'll refinance that seller debt if you guys go that route. If that buyer wants that business and the seller is comfortable carrying that debt, after a 24-month seasoning period, that's what is required by SBA.
So if you see the performance with the new owner in there, the financial performance of the business is doing well with the new owner, then you would strongly consider at that point refinancing.
Absolutely.
Wow.
That holds true not just for this conversation for an inexperienced industry buyer, but deals that don't pencil for SBA financing because the seller might not show all the cash, for example. Those are seller finance deals or cash deals. But it doesn't mean that we won't cash out the seller, refinance the seller note after 24 months. again, the required period, after the buyer proves themselves, after the books and records get cleaned up and tax returns are filed, etc.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. They prove themselves by then.
Let's talk timelines for a little bit too. I just think that from the point at which we bring you now a buyer wanting to be approved for a loan with you, how long does it typically take to vet them, get all their information in, and get a loan funded?
Start to finish, I'll tell you, it's generally 60 to 90 days. I want to use 90 for restaurants because more than not, they have a liquor license and ABC is a nightmare.
You are speaking to the choir on that one currently.
Are you really stuck to the 90 days? You can get deals done as long as the ABC license transfers?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
One of the things that I found unusual with the needs list during the lending process was that a lot of the schedule or the needs seemed to be ahead of the schedule of what we were able to get done with ABC Health Department and so on. Like, do you need the license physically to transfer in order to fund the loan? Do you need the new health permit active before the loan actually transfers?
You have to have insurance in place as well before the loan transfers, I believe. Yeah.
Yes, all those are needed. So what we issue to ABC is an unconditional funding letter. And that is us saying, no matter what, we have everything to fund this loan. So that may sit in escrow for a bit of time. But those buyers, unfortunately, are paying insurance. They have their business license in place. They have their health permit in place. Everything is done because some escrow companies actually make you fund the loan to escrow and the buyer's paying interest while they don't own a business for 2 to 6 weeks. We try to work with escrow companies, as you guys do, that don't require the monies to be in escrow. And in lieu of it, we put an unconditional funding letter in there, but it says unequivocally, we are funding this loan. The benefit to the buyer is they simply aren't paying interest during that purgatory time.
Have you ever not funded a loan after giving the unconditional funding letter?
No.
Interesting. I had a client who actually, he was getting lending during, I think it must have been right near 9/11, I think, if I remember correctly. And he was literally going to close like right around there, and the bank pulled the money. It was either that or the 2008 period, but I can't remember. But I remember he said they were scrambling at the last second and somehow they found money. But it was the only time I've ever heard of a bank pulling their funds at the last second like that.
Bob was a definitive no on that. He would never do that, listeners. Never.
Not to say we wouldn't. We haven't.
You haven't. Okay, got it. Good clarification. Bob, one of the funniest conversations we had, and also eye-opening for me, just to prepare my buyers for the lending process, is basically put a chastity belt on your wallet and spending during this timeline. Is that about sum it up for you?
100%.
Tell us some of those fun stories, what people have bought during this period that it raised an eyebrow and gone, what the F? Why did you do that during this process?
They buy other businesses, unbeknownst to us.
Oh.
They buy very large vehicles. They get a home equity loan on their house and never tell us about this stuff.
Oh, wow.
And you just scratch your head. You're like, do you not realize that this affects all of your world as far as what do you need to make to live, right? So as you mentioned before, is the required draw that we calculate is a function of you specifically. So a buyer who lives with mom and dad, for example, and has very little expenses, we might put a low draw requirement in that deal. Could be as low as $30,000, but it's probably in the $30,000 to $60,000 range. And then we have other buyers who have monster homes, monster mortgages, many vehicles, debts, 20, 30, 40,000 in credit card debt, which in many cases is okay, but we have to calculate for that buyer. What do you need specifically, buyer? Offset by spousal income, but what do you need, or outside income, I should say? What do you need to make to live? And if that dynamic changes because they do something silly during the process, it could turn into a decline.
What's your debt ratio for revolving that you use to calculate whether someone's lendable?
So overall, we use what's called a 45% debt to income ratio. It effectively takes their rent or mortgage payment, their car loans, if any, toy loans, if any, and then 5%, to answer your question, 5% of their outstanding balance on credit card. I strongly urge every buyer, you guys to encourage your buyers to eliminate all credit card debt. We all tax it in a very horrible way, to be perfectly honest. It's probably not fair, but we also hate credit card debt, revolving debt. It's high interest, it's short term, and most people use it as what's called evergreen in that they never pay it off. So we tax it as such that if you went to dinner, if you bought gas, if you bought groceries with your credit card, you paid it off at the end of the month. That's how we analyze it. It's paid off monthly.
Don't make big moves, people, during your lending process. That's the bottom line here.
Bob, how many SBA loans can one person have?
Or one entity?
As many as they can get, up to basically 5 million in SBA 7A loans.
Oh, it's a cap.
Yeah, the 504 loan for real estate goes up to, call it 10 million. But your buyers who are buying a business or multiple or opening additional stores, buying additional stores, 5 million is the number.
Got it.
Interesting.
All right. Well, are we ready for the most important question of the day, the bonus question?
I always have fun with this one. Yeah. Yeah. Bob, you're fantastic. You're a wealth of knowledge. I want you to be able to also let the listeners know right now. We'll do this too in the back end of this, but let them know how to reach you.
I am best reached on my cell phone. I answer my cell phone 7 days a week, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. My number is 916-206-9100 and or email robert.porter@plumasbank.com.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, just thank you so much for doing this today. We appreciate you a lot. I mean, you're just such a wealth of knowledge. You're very transparent with your answers and how you work with us. You're very clear with your needs for buyers and sellers and from us agents. So I highly recommend people reaching out to you about really anything in their lending needs because you're fantastic. So, all right. So we usually do a bonus question. It's backfired about 80% of the time because restaurateurs tend to say, oh my God, I love what I do. I wouldn't change a thing. But hopefully you have a different, answer because of you're an adrenaline junkie and all these fun things that we know about you. Anyways, what would you do if you had to work, but you didn't need the money?
I would be a chef.
Oh, the bomb dropped. Why? Why?
True story. Absolutely unequivocally, I would be a chef. In fact, for the last 10 years or so, there's a destination wedding facility that some friends of ours own. And the chef will call me once in a while when he has somebody out. He'll say, Porter, what are you doing? What are you doing tonight? I'm like, what do you mean tonight? He goes, well, in the next 3 hours. I go, Mom, I can make arrangements. What do you got? And he says, I need you to work. And I work for free and I cook for 6 or 8 hours for a big wedding. And they don't pay me. I take a little bit of food home, but I have the greatest time and I get it out of my system.
Oh my gosh.
That is cool, man. Wow. I did not know that.
I got a question for you then, Bob. Do you want to buy a restaurant?
No.
He said he didn't need the money, so then he would be a chef.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. That's a great answer. It feels very sincere. So I'm glad you enjoy chefing. It is quite a fun art. So anyways, guys, thanks again, Bob. We appreciate you immensely. Please, listeners, join us on our next episodes. We have some really interesting folks coming up. We have guests in the legal field. We have big city landlords. We got some top SoCal restaurant group operators and so on. So exciting stuff coming up for the fall.
Thank you so much, Bob. We really appreciate your time.
Hey, thank you for this opportunity. Cheers, guys.
All right. Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to worry about missing an episode, you can follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you found today's episode interesting or useful, please share it with someone you think would benefit and consider leaving a rating and review.
Reviews help restaurant owners or buyers just like you discover this podcast and benefit from the important topics covered in the episodes. Your opinion matters to us as a listener, so feel free to leave topic suggestions and feedback for us as we will use these to tailor the episodes to you and help you get the most out of listening.
Thank you all for listening to this week's episode of Restaurant Deal Making Exposed. If you're considering selling your business and would like a free consultation, reach out to Patrick and Andy at therestaurantsalesbroker.com or visit www.therestaurantsalesbroker.com to learn more.